Hi, guys. Welcome to another edition of Lifeline, living your future every day. Jason, Jay, Monica, good to see you guys.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good afternoon, depending on where you are.
Good afternoon.
Let's dive into this. So we're continuing our journey this month of the Millionaire Real Estate Agent, right? And we're walking through literally not page by page, but in our opinion, section by section. And so we land this month on Think a Million. And so in this session, I'd like to just unpack this idea of Think a Million. When I say that, Jay, to you, what crosses your mind? What does Think a Million mean to you, and why even talk about it?
Well, I can remember when we were had the flip charts up, and it was me, you, and Dave James, right? In that room, that office, in that first commercial building that I got to work in. And, going all the way back to like Dale Carnegie, if you can't conceive it, you can't achieve it. That's and right. This idea of inner to outer. And it was like a graduate school course to me, and something that no one had ever talked to me about is how much happens inside your mind before you can even do it in the real world. So again, if you limit your thinking, it's limiting your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Jason, how about you? When you hear this, Think a Million, right? Because immediately people go, well, one, why did you choose a million? And what do you mean, Think a Million?
I think you guys said it best, you and Jay, in Quantum Leap. It was what you think determines what you do, and what you do determines who you are. And this idea of this million, I don't know. I think when I first heard it, I was 19, and I kind of got fixated on the number because that seemed like all the money you would ever need ever. And then as I kind of started doing it, you realize that was just a framework to think, for me anyway, to think bigger than I was at the time. And that kind of changed everything for me about the plans that I had to make, the models that I had to find.
Yeah.
That's how I thought about it.
Monica, how about you?
I went to a different place. I went, why not Think a Million?
Yeah, why not? Sure.
Why not? What,
sure.
What career? How many careers can you get into real estate without 25 years of education and lots of college debt?
Oh,
You have a pathway. Keller Williams gives you a system on how to do this, and you can stop on the pathway anywhere you want. That's fine. But we've got a system that's duplicatable and scalable. So why not? How many careers have no cul-de-sac, have no stop? How many careers?
Yeah, that's right. No, 100%. I'll go back to the title, not the national bestseller, by the way. That's cool. It says it's not about the money. It's about being all you can be. So we only chose the dollar amount because we needed a very specific dollar to aim for. So we just chose a million, right? Which by the way, is still an incredible amount of money. It's so much money. It's so much money. But the bigger issue was think really big and then come up with a plan. Because the thing that we know, and Jay, you and I, man, for almost 20 years now, we talk about this every time we're together in some form or fashion. And that is your goal determines the plan.
Yes.
And the plan is what determines your life. So this idea of I'm going to think incremental goals with incremental plans actually builds boxes, right? It builds ways of thinking. It builds habits. It builds models and systems.
And relationships. It determines who you hang out with and who you hire.
Yeah. If you're just trying to get by today, I think about it again. If your goal is just to live one day, you can eat almost anything, probably anything, and survive the day. If your goal was to live to over 100, you would eat for longevity.
Yeah.
And so this idea of look, you could parent your kids in almost any way if the goal was just to survive the day. If your goal was to raise a kid with as the best self-image that they could possibly have, right? And to find their happiness in the world, that's a different set of parenting. And it's not just about the day. In fact, you may be willing to be disliked by your child very strongly in the moment in order to get to a bigger outcome. And I think that like you said, Jay, the thing that surprised me in unpacking this was the realization that most people don't think big, that they either have they have a limiting belief, or they were raised in an environment or actually never introduced to the idea that the way they thought actually determined the life that they led.
Yep.
Did that come out of these interviews? Like, you guys went through this exhaustive process of interviewing all these people. And I'm wondering, was this a chapter that you put in because you knew it to be true? Or when you spoke to these folks, did you realize they were all thinking bigger than the quote unquote average that you had also met with?
No, we put it in there because we know it's to be true. And then you go look for evidence. And what you notice is the men and women that succeed at a high level, most of them do it simply because they just don't know any limit. They don't strategically go think big. They personally just think, run through the wall, fly across the ocean. They don't actually think about whether that's a strategic way to program your life. Is that right, Jay?
Yeah, well, you heard Monica. Why not think a million? I mean, all you point to the higher target and the faster the engine revs, and that limitless thinking really powered a lot. And we saw, like, there was always the Frankenstein of MREA. Like, no one individual embodied all of this.
That's right.
We found evidence for parts of it throughout all of the interviews. And when you add up, like, what would be the ultimate package? We'll put it all together.
I guess that people maybe that think that big, I think, have this moment where maybe the folks around them look up and say, that sounds insane. Because I have vivid memories of sitting in rooms with people who said, I'm gonna close 20,000 units a year. And you hear that and you're like, at least my first reaction is like, okay, no one in the planet has ever done that as a real estate team. Like, that sounds great. But I'm sure there's a lot of folks that say, I'm going to go make $1 million in real estate. And their peer group looks up and says, no, probably not. But that's just how they see the world and start to
One of the best titles for any book ever was A Purpose-Driven Life. And and this is what we're talking about, right? There are individuals, and I think that the four of us embody this. And as we wake up in the morning and we just want to be all we can be. And so we just, every day, we just make improvements to our life. And we don't know any limit, right? Monica, at our age, she and I talk about this, and we both look up and we go, well, we don't know what retirement is. That doesn't make any sense to us. It's just a function of freedom. Right. As we get older, we just want the freedom to choose, right, and continue to live as big a life as we are able to create for ourselves. So for me, this was I had this aha earlier in my life, and that is, it's very instructive to go from just being a big thinker to being a purposefully big thinker, and those are two different things.
Yeah,
because what happens is, if you're a big thinker, you most likely have not uncovered some of the detail or some of the specific actions that you'll have to take to actually make that a reality. And so a lot of people thinking big is just a vacation in their head, right? They're having a great day today because they're what would you say, Jay? They're on a big thinking high.
Well, we actually saw this in some research we did for The One Thing, that when people put a big goal out on Facebook and everybody goes, oh my gosh, you're going for 20,000 units. They get so much validation from just the vacation in their head, like, oh, the imagining, that they don't take as often take action. And so the idea you always taught us is to work backwards from the goal. Well, if I'm going to do 20,000 units, now you start breaking it down. What would I have to achieve in the next 5 years, 1 year? And you start working to, how would I behave this week to be on track for that, which we call goal setting for the now. That, to me, when you said purposeful, I went right to goal setting to the now. You put a giant, crazy goal out there, and then you work it backwards to, how do I behave today?
Well, you have to, because the how you behave today determines whether you have to have Groundhog Day tomorrow and repeat again, or do you get to move progressively forward? When I was 22 years old, I ran to join the board of directors for the Junior Chamber of Commerce. And in my speech, I stood up and said, they said, tell us a little about yourself. And so I stood up in the room and I said, one of my goals is to be the number one realtor in the city. The guy, it was interesting, Barry Wooltag, a very nice guy. We were friends. He got up because he was running for the board, and he got up and said, yeah, I want to be that too. And I know Barry, and in fact, he reached out last year to me out of nowhere, actually. And Barry's still Barry, great guy, smart guy, wonderful guy, and he's doing exactly what he was doing back in 1979.
And Gary, don't you think there's one other component?
And by the way, I hit my goal at 29.
Well, of course you did. Of course you did. And the reason is, to me, one of the things we got to talk about here is the passion. You love what you do. You love getting up every day and do what you do. And so once you figure out on the pathway to $1 million, what is your perfect lane? Where do you excel?
Well, here's the question, Monica, and that is, do you wake up every day to grow and be your best, or do you wake up every day to be a realtor? I wake up every day to grow and be my best, and I chose the real estate industry and I fell in love with it. So my goals are centered around being my best through excelling and exceeding my own expectations at being a realtor.
It's interesting that you say that, because so many of the models that I've watched you use around the real estate brokerage business and the agent business, you then use those models in other businesses and even in just parts of your life. I've watched you do that purposefully.
Well, Jay and I, the surprise that Jay and I had, and we didn't know this would happen. And we need to take a second and just acknowledge our dear friend Dave, who passed a few weeks ago. I don't think the three of us understood that the writing of this book would impact other businesses. Yeah. But I can't tell you the feedback we've gotten in all the years since it was published, that people, Craig Goodliffe, who built, Cyberbacker, says, I just followed this book. He said, I just implemented this book and built this monster, virtual VA, virtual assistant company.
Yeah, you could have called
it.
The
first letter we got, Gary, was from a car salesman. That's my memory of the first one. And he talked about how he had taken this book and implemented it for car sales. And and it may have been Dave that said it, is, this is a roadmap for any service business.
Yeah, you could have called this the Millionaire business, because this idea, think powered by a big why and think big goals and think big models, those are universal truths across life, not just business, I think.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, guys, any final thoughts real quick? We're out of here. Think big, aim high, right? Live large.
Just go do it.
Go do it. Aim high. I do think I always come back when I think of this, because I didn't know about your definition of leadership until after we wrote the book, or if you had told me, it hadn't sunk in. Yeah. And I always get it off a little bit, but leadership is teaching people the way to think so they can do what they need to do, so they can do what they need to do when they need to do it, so they can get what they want when they want it. It's such a mouthful, but it's so specific. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is the definition of strategic thinking, is to think big and then understand, what do I need to do? When do I need to do it so I can get what I want when I want it? And I'm like, it's all wrapped up in the same thing.
Yeah, that's right. And what happens is that once you understand this magic of thinking big specifically, and again, remember, the millionaire real estate agent was about thinking big specifically, right? It's about being the most you can be by thinking big specifically. And once you learn how to think big specifically in one area of your life, and you start to see the power that gives you, you turn around and back to your relationships, back to your hobbies, back to all the other things in your life, to the point where you go, which really led Jay and I to ultimately write a book called The One Thing, right? Because goal setting to the now, this idea of, what's the one thing I can do, since by doing it, everything's easier and necessary. What's the thing that launches me to the next level, to get to my, and once you understand all this, you become addicted to the idea of being a purposeful big thinker, not just a big thinker, but a purposeful big thinker that attaches goals and specifics to it. It's not just have a happy marriage, what would a happy marriage look like? Can you define that? Okay, cool. So, by the way, what's the one thing you could do today, just by doing it, that everything else you could do to have a happy marriage would become easier or unnecessary? Can you go back to that and run? By the way, what's the one thing I can do today, such by doing it, everything else that I would need to do in order to net $1 million as a real estate agent would be easier or unnecessary? So they're like bookend books. It's taking, Jay and I took that first book, and 4 books later, right, we're now going deep into that single idea. The one thing was taking Think a Million and blowing it up and trying to give an owner's manual on how to actually do that.
Yeah.
Love that. Hey, Jay, but I take more notes during hosting this thing than it's the gift of it. Can you give that leadership definition one more time? I think everyone's going to be hitting rewind like 11 times.
Okay, I'll read it, and I'll read it slowly versus trying to recite it. Leadership is teaching people to think the way they need to think so they can do what they need to do when they need to do it, so they can get what they want when they want it. That's exactly what was in our slide on leadership from Family Reunion. I had to go chase it down so I wouldn't butcher it.
Yeah. And by the way, that's goal setting to the now.
Yeah, that was my aha.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly what it is, right? Getting people to think the way they need to think so they can do what they need to do when they need to do it, so they get what they want when they want it. Meaning that, how do I need to think in order to engineer what I do right now in order to be on that path, right? And that's a whole nother conversation, right? Because I'm not, true confession, love my wife beyond expression. The words cannot express the deep emotion that I feel for Mary. But I'm not a demonstrative person in the sense of I'm not spontaneous about how I would demonstrate that. So some would judge me, but I actually say, what's the one thing I can do? And I now live that at such a level that I ask myself that constantly with my wife. And you know the answer? What's the answer? Every time I ask that question, what's the answer for my wife?
Time.
Time. Kiss her. Hug her. Spend time with her. I mean, that's essentially the answer. Spend time with her, and she would prefer that I hug and kiss her. And so literally I begin the day. That's the first thing I do, right? As many times before I leave the house, I do that. When I get home, it's the first thing I do. I do that all night long. This is the way I live my life. A lot of people say, boy, you've overthought that. I go, I'm having a great marriage.
Yeah. You said,
kiss my grits about your judgment about how I got there. But my wife will say, yeah, we have a great marriage because he makes me the focus and he makes what I want the focus for our relationship.
You said at a mastermind, and we were younger, and you said, look, there's people out there that are going to spell love Time. And some of you are going to wake up every day and try to do everything other than that. And I'm just here to tell you, you're never going to accomplish it if that's true. And that was really impactful when you said it.
Look, let's be real clear. I mean, our friend Dave Jinks on his deathbed, I promise you that the doctor came in and said, your lungs are shot. We can keep you alive, but you're not going to live. And we know our buddies then said, okay, I got it. I understand. Here's the plan. Can you give me X amount of time? And I'd like to say goodbye to the people that matter to me. And he wrote a love letter on Facebook, and then he made a few phone calls, and then he turned to the doctor and said, I'm ready. Let's go. And he was dead. So what did he do in the final hour of his life? Do you think he went back and recanted all his commissions and blah, 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 blah? No, he focused on one thing for the last hour of his life, is the relationships.
Yeah.
And so he sent a love letter out to all the people. And then he made a few phone calls to the key people, right? Probably sent some key texts. And then he said, I'm gone.
Well, here's a challenge for everybody listening to this today. When you finish listening to this, pick up the phone and call someone you love and tell them that. Why wait?
Why wait?
It's not going to get any better than that. Well, that was
okay. We're out of here. Thanks, guys. Think big.